Hello, everyone. The stream will be beginning shortly, but let's make sure I can get my screen shared, okay? Okay, can everyone see it? I don't like doing it this way, but sometimes I have to. Okay, can everyone see it? Okay, we're going to give everyone a minute or two to go in. We're going to be discussing world building and writing mechanics. So, world building is an incredibly complicated part of writing and one that oftentimes people don't think about. So, we're going to keep it relatively simple. And then we're just going to start with the how do you build a world, and then how do you use that world to start building a structured story. So that'll be a fun place to start. And I built this little template. If you wish to have the template, send a request to me. I'll see about getting a copy sent to you. But if everything will go well, we'll get some people showing up soon. So, everyone prepared with your stories? Everyone know what questions they want to ask? Awesome. So, let's start with the fun bit of the world building genre. I know it's a weird question to start with genre compared to everything else. After all, you could build anything you want, so why start with genre instead of anything else? Well, that's actually important to know what style of story you're going in before you build anything else. Let's use some examples everyone's likely familiar with. Is everyone familiar with The Nightmare Before Christmas? Yeah, the genre for that is children's movie, specifically children's adventure fantasy. So, because of that, even though we deal with horrific monsters in a Halloween setting, a lot of those monsters are styled in that way, where they're meant to appeal to or scare children. They're meant to give kind of a fantastical feel with it versus an ability to actually scare. Because if you wanted The Nightmare Before Christmas to be a horror movie, you could very easily make a horror movie out of it. For all, there's tons of horror movies that take place during Christmas. There's Krampus, there's Terrifier 3, both great movies I would like to add. But those take place during Christmas and are scary movies. I believe there's also a slasher movie about a killer snowman, but you'll have to let me know. And welcome, Kev. Welcome, Custom Kits. So let's start with genre. I'm going to use an example from one of my own stories, and then we're going to go with that. So the genre I'm going to use, which is not going to make a lot of sense, political urban fantasy. Again, the genre doesn't necessarily have to be something that makes sense to everyone, but it should at least make sense to you. Political urban fantasy could mean anything, but if anyone's familiar with Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, you're definitely going to be familiar with it. So, political urban fantasy. And then there's the theming of the story. Overall, what is the story about? Again, using the example of The Nightmare Before Christmas, can anyone tell me what they think the theme of that movie was? I mean that legitimately. It does feel a little confusing and a little contrived at times. Because I can definitely understand the whole point of you don't want to take away other people's jobs and you definitely don't want to appropriate from them. But alternatively, I also don't quite like the theme of just stick to what you're good at no matter what. But understanding the theming of your story is good for you, even if your audience does not necessarily understand it. So I'm doing political urban fantasy there. So what's a theme I'm going to do? Let's say, hmm, let's say religion versus humanity. Not humanity as people, humanity as in the concept of humanity. Actually, this might even be better. Religion versus philosophy. An odd thing to go with. And again, you're probably not quite sure what I'm building out to here, but I am building something. And then there's the next part of the world building. Does this take place in the past, present, or future? Yes, I know it's a weird thing to start with that first before everything else, but there is a point. Does this story take place in the past? Does it take place in the present? Or does it take place in the future? Or does it take place in the story's past, present, and future? Some stories kind of take place during a story's past. So let's say, for example, Frankenstein, like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the novel, not the movie. Most of the events of Frankenstein are conveyed by Victor Frankenstein to an Arctic explorer who is dictating what happened. So most of the events of the Frankenstein book are actually happening in the past of the person who's narrating it. So understanding who's the narrator of your story, then understand, is this narrator narrating something that's already happened, something as it's happening, or is this something that is going to happen? Yeah, give that a moment to think. Are you telling a story that will happen, or as it's happening, or in the past? When you start looking at that, that gets really interesting. For example, using again Nightmare Before Christmas, easy example to use. Lots of people know it. That story is told by a narrator, and if you listen to the music, you will actually understand that the events of The Nightmare Before Christmas happened in the past of when the narrator is actually telling it. So that's interesting. Or using the SpongeBob show as an example. Most of those events are occurring in the present because they're actively occurring as they're being told to you. As for something being told that's happening in the future, that's a little harder to do. Prophetic tales usually come to mind, or someone telling you about a future event. The interesting part of telling you a future event is, how did that person tell you about that future event? Are they seeing it? Is this something they're thinking will happen? Or even more interestingly, did they come from the future? But if they came from the future, they're relaying events they've already seen or events that led up to them going back to the past. That's actually them telling you the past rather than the future. But for my sake, I'm going to say past for this. And here's a fun question. Does the story take place in our universe? I know, odd question, but it's not as easy as you think. Lots of stories supposedly take place in our universe, and lots of stories supposedly don't. If you take, say, The Sopranos, supposedly that's taking SpongeBob made a reference. Yes, I did. But if you take, for example, The Sopranos are supposedly taking place in our universe. So that means any kinds of rules, any kinds of laws, any kind of understanding has to be seen through that frame of that universe. So any laws the Sopranos are breaking have to be laws in our universe, at least the laws of their local area of the universe. And then you have stuff that explicitly do not take place in our universe. Halloween Town explicitly is not our universe. And then you have things like, say, Jurassic Park, because a lot of that actually depends on things that don't exist in our world. So even though it's not our universe and it's analogous for our universe, it's not our universe. And then you have stuff that really straddle the line between, is this supposed to be our universe or is this not? Cabin in the Woods comes to mind, because again, we don't have endless deities under the ground we appease by killing virgins. Believe me, I've checked. We don't have those. Um, yes, that's also true. Star Wars is also supposedly in our universe, but it's in the distant past. And that's what makes Star Wars kind of interesting there, is you have something that's taking place in the past in a galaxy far, far away, but again, it's supposed to be our universe. Something interesting to think about and has implications if you think about it. Lord of the Rings also supposedly takes place in our universe in a distant past. So if you're going to put a story and put it in our universe, that's something you can do, but be aware that may have consequences you may not predict. So for my story, is this going to be in our universe? No. I can clarify this. Which universe is it in? The merged universe. I'll explain that more later. Then there's the, is it our world? Again, feels a little bit similar to our, is this our universe? But it's a little more explicit than that. It's more akin to, is this our world? Is this meant to be a realistic fiction, or is this meant to be a less realistic fiction? Again, using Jurassic Park as an example, it's not our universe because it's dependent on geography that isn't in our world. It's dependent on science that wouldn't work in our world, and it's dependent on dinosaurs that either don't exist or weren't discovered at the time. But it was meant to be our world. It was meant to be Earth. It was meant to be near the United States. So even if there are laws or specific details that are different, overall you're going to recognize the world. So again, is this our world but not our universe? In Halloween Town, it's not our world because again, Halloween Town is not necessarily in a place that would exist in our world. And I think I'm just confusing everyone. So basically, our world is, if you would show this world to someone, would they immediately recognize it as Earth, or would they recognize it as a different planet? So Skyrim, for example, initially might look like Earth, but the more you go around in Skyrim, it's clearly not Earth. So basically, our world is this the Earth? So is this our world? No. Name of the planet, if I remember right, yeah, Harmony. Cosmology is a tricky one, so I'm just going to keep it simple. It's what rules dictate eight, or rule over the universe. Again, this is something that we can spend hours on these details. As you know, physicists can spend hours on simple details. But the best way to break down the cosmology is it magic? Is it physical? Is it spiritual? So in those three broad categories. Skyrim is a nerd. Fun fact. Thank you. I knew about that, but always happy for a fun fact. But again, cosmology. Is this a physical world with no gods, no spirits, no magic ruling over it overall? Again, using House, MD, as an example. Even though the House universe is complicated, it's a very, very physical world. There are no ghosts, there are no spirits, there are no gods. There are a lot of fake outs and a lot of strange things that borderline supernatural, but the universe is quite clear that all of these events are not supernatural. Say versus the Star Wars universe. Yes, I know the Force isn't really a spiritual or godly energy, it's something else entirely, but it's still an energy that dictates and works around the universe. So the Force can have an impact on the plot, even if not necessarily in a physical way. Then there's the spiritual or religious aspect. So let's say we can use Skyrim as another example. So in Skyrim, there are Daedric princes, there are gods, there are powerful, powerful magical forces that will flat out mess with people, and they will also run parts of the universe or make certain parts of the universe possible or not possible. So in Skyrim, there can be a magical event that's like, oh, this person turned into a zombie. That's a normal part of our universe. Or again, using, say, Land of the Dead or something like that. Well, no, Land of the Dead, that's not magic, bringing the dead back. It's radiation. Again, it's quite a supernatural thing, but it's the difference between a physical presence, spiritual, or magical force. So if you can keep track of like if there is a magical force, if you want something realistic, or if you want something else entirely, keep that up, keep that in mind because it can affect your plot quite a bit. Because again, let's just say you're running a setting where the Greek gods are real and everyone knows about the Greek gods. So if that's the case, then your cosmology is dictated by these gods. You have to go into this assuming that there are gods running things. Does that account for soft and hard magic? Good question. We're actually going to be talking about that in a little bit. And cosmology is more of just the broad sense of, are there other forces in this world affecting the plot? Are there gods in this universe? Yes or no? Are there angels? Yes or no? Are there demons? Yes or no? Kind of thing. It's not is this a hard magic or this is a soft magic? Those will fit into known rules and unknown rules. That's just for cosmology is. What are the broader forces that affect your plot? Because if you want to go here, there's no magic, there's no supernatural, there's no anything, that's going to be very different from, say, there are gods, there are demons, there are angels. So for cosmology of my world, I'm going to say gods exist as public figures. Magic is well known, not necessarily understood. Some real life examples, people know science exists. People know all kinds of fun facts about science. And if you really dig into a lot of it, people don't fully understand it. Like your devil cat figure, that's great. So, known rules. What are some common rules about the cosmology or the world that everyone knows? So, for example, gravity is a fun example. What goes up must come down. That's an incredibly common rule. Most people don't even think about it anymore. And then there's the real interesting one, where it's just like the sun rises, the sun sets. And people can get sick, people can die. Those are all known rules that everyone in our world knows. But here's where it can tie to your cosmology. Hey Luna, welcome. So your known rules can tie to your cosmology, or they cannot. But let's use again hard and soft magic as an example. Death is a natural process of our world, and as best as we can understand it, it's just a part of physics and it's a part of biology. But let's say you have a hard magical world where magical beings have to be crafted by magicians. Well, then if they die, that's not necessarily a natural thing. That's a magical thing that occurs. Or say, let's use My Little Pony for example. Cosmology of that place is confusing. The sun rises and sets based on the dictations of a pony. So even though the sun rises and sets, that's a magical force in My Little Pony, even though it's not in, say, House. So if there are known rules, how does it tie to cosmology? So if death exists, is there a reason behind it? If gods exist in your setting, but they're not public figures, does that mean the Grim Reaper exists and that's why death happens? Or maybe there are angels, or maybe there are demons that cause death, or maybe it doesn't even apply to your setting. But just think about the known rules of the setting and how it can tie to your higher cosmology. So again, do things die in your setting because that's what the gods say it does? Do things die in your setting because that's what the spirits say? Or is it a random physical chance? You don't know. But these are things to think about. For my thing, I'm going to say gods choose the rules and have to disclose why before they take it. Again, I'm building towards something, it'll make more sense as it goes on. And then there are the unknown rules. What are things that happen or exist that people don't necessarily understand? Again, based on a purely non supernatural setting, the sun rises and the sun sets. But do your characters necessarily understand what the sun is? Or again, using a magical setting, let's say there are gods, then there are unknown rules. If there are gods, do people understand why gods don't intervene with everything? What are some unknown rules of this universe? Again, it can be a known unknown or it can be an unknown unknown. So, for example, your characters might not know what's on other planets. They might not know why life is rare, or they might not know why life is so common. Those are interesting thoughts to think about. And when there are unknowns and mysteries, that's where things can get real interesting. So if the dead just suddenly start coming back to life and like say Land of the Dead, The Walking Dead, Plants vs. Zombies kind of settings, no one really knows why. That's a hard and set rule. The recently dead keep coming back. We don't know why. Or again, using Star Wars as an example, why do these cycles of violence keep happening? There's tons of mysteries of Star Wars that I don't understand. I've never actually really seen it, so I'm not good using that as an example. But let's even use Skyrim as an example. Your character is the last dragonborn in Skyrim. Do you know why? Heck, do you know why your character was even chosen as a dragonborn? The unknown rules can also be just thought of as little mysteries of the universe. These can be later explored or they could not be explored. But they give your characters and you, the writer, things that you can choose to explore, or even just an excuse to be like, I didn't really think this through, so I'm just gonna leave it as an unknown. So unknowns. So unknown rules, why each pantheon only rules over its territory, for its territory, and how the territory is set. And now we're going to get something that people are going to be a lot more familiar with as just simply setting or parts of a setting. So, the environment. What environment is your story being told in? If you're doing, say, a slasher, what kind of environment is the slasher taking place in? Is it in a suburb? Is it in an inner city? Is it in the outer city? Is it under the city? It could be in the forest. It could be on the plains. It could be a desert. You could do it in the sky. You could do it on the moon. You could do it underground. You could do it in the Earth's core. Honestly, there's a lot you can do with environment. Again, if unless your story is literally like a groundbreaking, this is taking place across an entire planetary scale, odds are your characters are going to be in a single environment at a time. So just think about what that environment is like. Think about what would it be like if you were in that environment. So again, we're going to use the slasher example because it's the easiest to think of. Pretend you're going to a camp. You don't the camp was last minute, so you're not quite clear on where it is. It's isolated. It's quiet. You get a vague sense of danger, but you don't know why, and it's something completely unfamiliar. What kind of environment are you imagining? Because that can describe the mountains. That could be a desert. It could be a volcanic landscape. Although most people aren't going to do a camp on a volcanic landscape, but you know what I mean. But again, just doing that known versus unknown danger or just that or thinking about how the environment makes you feel can be quite impactful. So the environment will be quite interesting. But even a city versus non-city environment gets interesting. I do a lot of creepypasta stuff, so my environment and my threats in the environment, yeah, volcanic camp would be a fun challenge, especially if we throw Jason in there. Or if you want to think about it though, you know what is a volcanic place people often camp? Hawaii. People don't think of it as a challenging environment, but it could be. Because remember, Lost took place in Hawaii. Well, they filmed in Hawaii. The actual island was not Hawaii, but you know what I mean. I love your expressions, custom kits. But yeah, think about the environment that the story takes place will affect the story that you're telling. So not just the fact of like, oh, where is it physically taking place, but just is the character familiar with the environment? Because again, if it's in the forest in a slasher environment, but the character has lived there for 20 years, and the slasher is just some random hitchhiker who's walking through the area, the character is going to be a lot more familiar with it versus say in a completely unknown environment. Even in the Friday the 13th franchise, which everyone loves to mock and make fun of, you have to remember pretty much every one of those characters was unfamiliar with Camp Crystal Lake. Jason wasn't. So that's an interesting thought about the environment. Even when Jason was in Manhattan, the people going to Manhattan were not familiar with Manhattan. I love the idea the killer's just some dude he has no idea what he's doing. Well, you might not know this, but some killers are just like that. So environments. So for my story, it is a worldwide scale, but I'll do a bit more. A place where 8 different worlds merged and their pantheons meet to discuss. And again, The idea of government here, you can just keep it super broad, but just the idea of like, is there going to be a government in the setting or is there not? And even if there is not necessarily government in the setting, what kind of government is the character going to be familiar with? Because again, someone living in a medieval setting is going to be a lot more familiar with, say, a monarch and feudalism than they are with democracy. Someone living in the United States is going to have, generally speaking, the idea that the police are going to help them. And you can even take that idea like if there is a government in the setting, is the government going to be helpful or are they going to be harmful towards you? Again, not something people think about too much, but even with Barbarian, a fun little horror movie I've seen recently, where the character was kidnapped for weeks, and when they finally escaped and they called the police completely unhelpful. But that's an idea of how the government has an impact on the story, where it's just is the government helpful or is the government harmful? Yeah, it's a great movie. Fun little fact, you can actually see the book that was kept in the pack, Jane Eyre. It's a fun little foreshadowing of where the story's going. You see that a lot in movies, actually. It's actually more unusual to see someone pick up a book and have it not mean anything. But yeah, so is the government helpful or unhelpful in the setting? Just what kind of government are they familiar with? So for this one, I'm going to say multinational, highly political, used to talking, not action. Mind you, this is just based on what I'm building here. Political urban fantasy with the theme of religion versus philosophy, taking place in the past, different universe from ours, planet's called Harmony, with a cosmology of gods exist as public figures, the magic's well known but not necessarily understood. The gods choose the rules and have to disclose why they're choosing the rules before they change them. Unknown rules is each pantheon only rules a territory, and they don't know how the territory is set. The environment is 8 different worlds merged into one, and where the pantheons meet to discuss. The government in the setting is multinational and highly political, but they're used to talking, not necessarily taking violent action against each other. And you can see how I'm building out pretty simply, and we've not even gotten to the characters or the main conflict yet. So religion, just kind of what religion is in the setting, if any, and if there isn't a religion in the setting, what's the belief structure? Again, let's use Saw as an example. While religion is not a symbol used in the Saw movies, people do say, "Oh my God, Jesus Christ," things like that, as a way of showing that they are in danger or that they feel threatened or hurt in some way. So even though that's not necessarily something that has a big impact on the story, it's something that people are familiar with. So even if your characters are atheists, that's still going to have an impact on the story depending on where they are and what religion's necessarily the majority. If your character is from the Middle East, even if they're atheistic, odds are they're still going to say if God is willing or inshallah when they say something. If they're from a Christian majority society, they're slightly likely to say "Oh my God" or "Goodbye" as common phrases. So it's just something to think about. But just the idea of like how does the religion or belief structure kind of shape the world around them or the characters within it. Or to take it even a step further, everyone's familiar with Dracula, right? And everyone's familiar that Dracula is vulnerable to a crucifix. Again, that's a specifically Christian symbol. So is he going to have the same reaction to a different object of faith? Or is it Christian specific? Kind of things to think about. Because again, depending on the way you do your story, you may literally kind of have the subtext of like this one religion is the right one and every other religion is wrong. Egyptian gods is a fun example. Pirates of the Caribbean, also a fun example because again, you discover Aztec gods are real. So, what does that mean about the world religions? You know? Or is that mean every god is real? Or even more interestingly, is there some kind of force going on, but it's not necessarily the gods that we understand them? Again, it's a good idea why you want to establish your cosmology before you establish your religion. Because again, if you're doing a setting with purely no purely with no godly interference in any way, you'll still have religious people. But if you're doing a setting where there is a godly figure, but they don't, and they intervene, and they have her religion that doesn't believe in that god, suddenly you're getting something quite different. Again, using House MD as an example, because they go purely non supernatural, you have religious people in there all the time. But if you're a religious figure and there is no kind of greater force affecting the plot, then it just makes the character who does so look silly. On the other hand, though, if there is a religious figure that's affecting the plot, then you make those who believe in something else or believe in nothing look silly too. Kind of, we're going to use the Marvel Universe as an example here because they've proven by this point there are other gods out there. So if you're in the Marvel Universe and you get saved by Thor and you're still an atheist, what does that tell you about that character? Or at least the way they view the world? Again, these are interesting things to think about. And again, why you want to establish, what forces in the universe exist before you establish a religion or belief around them. Because again, they may believe in something completely contradictory to the way the cosmology of a universe works, or they might believe in something that lines up with it exactly. These are both interesting ways of doing it, and it's something you can explore. So religion, for this one, gods are public figures. Each world connects to their gods differently. Belief overall, gods need gods need humanity, and humanity needs gods. From that conflict arises trouble. And there's good versus evil in the setting. So, what is something that is good? What is something that is evil? Because again, not in every setting is going to be the same, and because it's storytelling, the character can do evil. Because again, not in every setting is going to be the same, and because it's storytelling, the character can do. Because again, not in every setting is going to be the same, and because it's storytelling,